The mountain air at dusk was thin and biting, carrying the distant echo of chains dragging through gravel. At the far end of a remote illegal menagerie, caged animals howled and paced in their cramped pens, their cries muffled by darkness and the weight of despair. Every corner of the compound stank of old straw and fear, thick as fog beneath flickering bulbs strung along rusted fencing. In the center, Gustavo, the overseer, smirked as he oversaw a new kind of cruelty. Tonight, he was determined to put on a show for his shadowy clients. A battered Mustang, fur matted and streaked with old scars, was being dragged toward a barred enclosure. His name was Solano. He didn't struggle, only planted his hooves in the mud, eyes wide and luminous in the torchlight, carrying a quiet defiance that unsettled even the toughest handler. Elias stood by the gate, holding a thick rope in trembling hands, late 20s, hair tousled by mountain wind. He wore a caretaker's blue jacket, frayed, stained, hanging off narrow shoulders. He watched Solano with a growing dread that threatened to split him apart. Gustavo's men shoved the horse forward, laughing, slapping the animal's flank, daring it to panic. But Solano simply gazed at Elias, his breath slow, his body shivering with exhaustion, yet refusing to collapse. Beyond the bars, 3 emaciated tigers prowled restlessly, their orange stripes ghostly in the low light. A deadly spectacle was being prepared, the horse thrown into the tiger pit. The stakes were clear. Blood would spill, or fear would break the spirit of every witness, human and animal alike. Elias's mind raced. He'd seen brutality here before. He'd flinched and obeyed, rationalizing that one caretaker couldn't change anything. Tonight, though, as Solano's eyes met his, a look both mournful and stubborn, something inside Elias began to tremble. Not with fear, but with the faintest spark of resistance. He remembered his first day on the mountain, pockets empty, running from debts, convinced he had no other choice. Just feed the animals, they'd promised. But the job had become a trap, and he'd let his spirit rot in exchange for survival. The moon climbed higher, guards gathered. Gustavo's voice thundered, "Ready the pit!" as he gestured for Elias to prepare the Mustang. Cameras were set up, beaming the cruelty for a paying audience. The smell of gasoline from torches mingled with wet hay and tiger musk. Elias worked, hands clumsy, heart pounding. He wiped mud from Solano's flank, whispering beneath his breath, "Forgive me." But Solano didn't flinch. Instead, the horse pressed his muzzle softly against Elias's chest. It was a silent plea, a message both desperate and dignified. Elias's throat tightened. He'd been a coward too long. Gustavo's shadow loomed. "Move, or you join the show," he barked, waving a baton, his anger barely masked by a smile for the camera. The guards snickered, nudging each other, eager for a spectacle. A storm was building in Elias's mind. Was he really about to lead this horse to slaughter? Did he still believe his life was worth more than the dignity of the animals he'd once loved as a child? Every muscle in his body screamed to run, to look away, to not make trouble. But Solano's gaze held him in place. Suddenly, thunder cracked overhead. Rain began to fall, turning the yard into a field of mud. The handlers cursed, slipping and struggling to maintain control of the horse. Solano seized the moment. He reared, not out of wild fear, but with a forceful refusal to go quietly. His hooves flashed in the air, splattering mud across Gustavo's pristine boots. Tension snapped. The guards gripped their batons. Gustavo cursed, pushing Elias toward the gate. "Get him in, now!" The crowd of animals pressed against their cages, as if they understood what was about to happen. Elias froze. In the half-light, his reflection stared back at him from a puddle, haunted, ashamed, but no longer empty. The Mustang's breathing was steady, his body battered but unbroken. In that moment, Elias saw not just an animal, but a being who had survived years of brutality and still refused to surrender. He turned to Gustavo, voice shaking but clear. "There's still time. This isn't right." Gustavo's lips curled into a sneer. "Do it, or you're next." A roar erupted from the tiger pen. The youngest tiger, a male with bright gold eyes, leapt up, slamming his body against the cage bars as if to challenge the world itself. The night, thick with anticipation and rain, felt like the edge of a knife. Elias knew. Before sunrise, he'd have to make a choice. He could obey and let another innocent life be crushed for entertainment. Or he could rebel and risk losing everything, perhaps even his own life. But when Solano gently pressed his head into Elias's hand, it was as if hope itself had chosen sides. The caretaker's resolve hardened. Tonight would decide not just Solano's fate, but his own soul's future. Lightning flashed again, illuminating every trembling shadow. In the quiet before the next command, Elias breathed in the scent of rain, horse, and fear, and knew he could not go back. The rain had slowed to a drizzle by the time the torches were lit, their flames hissing and spitting along the slick gravel paths. The mountain menagerie was tense, every animal awake, drawn to the glow and the commotion. Torchlight flickered off metal bars and painted wild shadows across the faces of men and beasts. A chorus of distant thunder rolled overhead, amplifying the sense that something irreversible was about to happen. Gustavo's face, usually a mask of smug confidence, was twisted with impatience. He stood at the edge of the tiger pit, baton tapping against his palm, coat still streaked with mud from Solano's earlier defiance. Around him, guards clustered in a half-circle, phones ready, each one eager to catch the moment that would cement Gustavo's legend among his criminal clients. The night a Mustang was thrown to the tigers. Elias's boots squelched in the mud as he led Solano to the edge of the enclosure. His heart hammered against his ribs, every step feeling like a step toward his own execution. Solano, battered and caked with dirt, walked with quiet dignity, each hoof placed carefully. The crowd jeered. One guard spat at the ground. The world felt impossibly small and impossibly cruel. Gustavo's voice sliced through the darkness. "Now, Elias, do it. Open the gate and get that animal inside. Make it memorable." Elias's fingers fumbled with the latch. He felt the weight of every set of eyes, human and animal, on him. His thoughts were a whirlwind. Memories of his father, gentle hands teaching him how to groom a foal, the stray dog he'd rescued as a boy, only to lose her to illness because he had no money for medicine. Regrets coiled around his spine, cold and paralyzing. He looked up. Solano's eyes caught his again, as if offering one last silent plea. In the background, the tigers prowled, their bodies tense, tails flicking, breath steaming in the chill air. The youngest male, the one with the gold eyes, stared straight at Elias, almost as if he, too, was waiting for the caretaker's choice. Elias inhaled deeply. The torchlight danced on Solano's battered coat, highlighting every scar. He took one trembling step back, then another, moving between Solano and the open gate. "No," he said. His voice was hoarse but grew steadier. "I'm not doing this." The words hung in the air. For a split second, time froze. A single drop of water slipped from Solano's mane, landing in the mud with a sound impossibly loud in the silence. Gustavo's baton slammed against the metal rail. "What did you say?" he demanded. "I said no. This is wrong," Elias repeated, louder now, the shame and guilt of years burning away in the fire of a single choice. This place is a disgrace. You're a murderer, Gustavo. You make us killers too, just for your games. I won't do it anymore. Shock rippled through the crowd. Some guards exchanged uncertain glances. Others laughed nervously. A few raised their phones higher, eager for the spectacle to spiral out of control. Gustavo strode forward, shoving Elias hard in the shoulder. "You want to play hero?" he sneered. "Fine. Go in there with him then. See how long you last." Suddenly, the young tiger let out a roar. Not a sound of hunger, but something deeper, almost protective. He bounded toward the bars, pressing himself against the cage separating him from Solano. The older tigers, instead of lunging, paced anxiously at his side, as if caught between instinct and some mysterious allegiance. Gustavo hesitated, baton raised, confusion flickering across his face. Elias, heart racing, stepped toward Solano, placing himself between the horse and the open pit. He spread his arms as if to shield the animal with nothing but his own trembling body. "Stop!" he shouted, voice cracking. "If you want to hurt him, you'll have to hurt me first." The young tiger roared again, this time joined by the others. Their growls resonated through the compound, unnerving even the toughest guard. For the first time in his life, Elias felt the trembling line between prey and predator, courage and fear, blur into something altogether new. Gustavo cursed. "Get him out of the way!" he yelled at the guards. But as two guards stepped forward, the young tiger threw himself against the bars, teeth bared, not at Solano, not at Elias, but at the men advancing with clubs. His massive head swung in warning, eyes burning with a wild, intelligent anger. The older tigers circled behind him, not attacking Solano, but forming a barrier between the men and the horse. A stunned hush fell over everyone. The tigers, starving, abused, bred for violence, had become guardians. In the chaos, one guard dropped his phone. Another backed away, muttering a prayer. Gustavo's face was a mask of disbelief and outrage, his authority splintering before his eyes. Elias, still shaking, knelt beside Solano, hand buried in the horse's mane. For a moment, he felt the animal's heart beating against his palm, steady and alive. He understood. Something had shifted, not just in the cage but inside himself. He was no longer a bystander. The guards faltered. Gustavo shouted, but his voice no longer carried the same weight. Elias raised his voice again, this time to the cameras and to the sky. "You can film this. Show the world what real courage looks like." The young tiger's tail flicked. He sat down beside Solano, emitting a low, rumbling purr, an impossible gesture of peace. Around them, the menagerie held its breath. Tonight, Elias had crossed a line. There was no going back. A hush fell over the compound, thicker than any fog. For a heartbeat, even the night seemed to hold its breath. Every animal silent, every human still. Elias knelt in the mud, his hand tangled in Solano's coarse mane, the horse's breath slow and warm against his face. The guards who had rushed forward now hovered at a distance, eyes wide, uncertain, glancing at Gustavo as if the old rules had just shattered. Within the pen, the tigers circled Solano and Elias, tails low, their enormous bodies tense with decision. The young male, gold-eyed and battle-scarred, moved first. He padded over, muscles rippling, and lowered his great head, sniffing at Solano's flank. The horse trembled, once violently, but did not bolt. Elias tightened his grip, bracing for claws, for chaos. But instead, the tiger exhaled, a deep, chesty rumble. He stepped between Solano and the far bars, placing himself in a posture that could only be called protective. The older tigress followed, brushing past Solano so close her whiskers tickled his leg, then curled herself at his side. The third tiger, older, limping, paced behind, forming a loose, breathing wall of fur and muscle. It was a vision out of some ancient fable, predator and prey side by side, united against a common enemy. For a long moment, no one moved. The guards, rattled, waited for Gustavo's command. Gustavo, pulse pounding at his temples, didn't know what to say. The spectacle he'd promised had turned inside out, leaving him outnumbered not by force, but by something stranger: defiance, compassion, even awe. Elias felt his knees go weak, not from fear, but from the enormity of it all. He looked up and found Solano's eyes again. The horse blinked slowly, steady, as if to say, "I'm here, I won't run." Rain tapped out a slow rhythm on the iron bars, gentle now, almost soothing. Elias shifted, ignoring the ache in his legs, and shaking, sat fully beside the Mustang, mud soaking through to his skin. Solano lowered his head, and in a gesture that felt impossibly intimate, rested his heavy jaw on Elias's thigh. The tigers, breathing in tandem, circled but did not attack. They watched the humans now, waiting, measuring. Torchlight wavered as one of the guards, hands trembling, edged backward, whispering, "It's not natural, man." Another swore, clutching his phone as if it could shield him from the impossible. Inside the pen, a strange peace took hold. The tension of violence slowly bled away, replaced by something deeper, a fragile trust. Elias, his heart still thundering, listened to Solano's breath, the slow, steady rise and fall anchoring him to this moment. For the first time in years, he did not feel small or powerless. He whispered, barely audible, "You saved us, didn't you?" Solano flicked an ear, as if acknowledging the truth. The young tiger, almost gentle now, nudged Solano's flank with his great head before settling back down beside him, watchful, resolute. On the other side of the bars, Gustavo was livid. "Enough!" he shouted, voice thin and strained. "Back away, Elias! Out! Now!" But the guards hesitated. The tigers had not followed their script. The horse had not broken. The cameras were still rolling. But the world was no longer watching a show of domination. It was witnessing a miracle of survival and alliance. Elias stayed where he was, refusing to yield. He sensed that leaving now, abandoning Solano to whatever fury Gustavo might unleash, would mean losing his last shreds of courage forever. Instead, he let his hand drift along Solano's battered neck, feeling each heartbeat, each scar. He saw the glint of teeth as the young tiger yawned, unthreatened, almost bored. He wondered, wildly, impossibly, if the animals knew more than the men, if, having suffered together, they had found in each other the seeds of a new order. Not predator and prey, but survivors, allies against a world that profited from their pain. Minutes passed. The torches sputtered lower. The guards, murmuring among themselves, finally retreated a few steps, no longer certain whose orders they ought to follow. Even Gustavo, for all his bluster, could not will the animals back into their old roles. He stalked off toward his office, barking for someone to shut off the cameras and lock the gates. In the sudden quiet, Elias felt something shift within him. He remembered a time before all this. A boy curled up with a book about wild horses, the soft nose of a neighbor's dog nudging his cheek. The first time he'd felt awe instead of fear. Tonight, he realized, he was living that kind of story, not as a child who watched from a distance, but as a man finally choosing to act. He leaned close, whispering, I won't turn away again. Solano's breath warmed his hand. The tigers, settling in, blinked slow approval. From the shadows, other animals pressed against their cages, watching this small island of peace with something like hope in their eyes. Later, when the compound had grown still, Elias stayed inside the pen. He sat in the mud, exhausted, shivering, but at peace for the first time in years. Solano slept with his muzzle on Elias's knee. The young tiger kept watch, every so often brushing the air with his tail, his eyes catching the starlight. Outside, Gustavo plotted his next move. But inside the cage, for one night, the impossible had come true. Enemies had become protectors, and a broken man had chosen to be brave. By dawn, everything would change. Night seeped into every crevice of the mountain compound, settling thick and heavy like an old blanket that suffocated sound and magnified loneliness. The torches outside the pen had burned down to stubs, and the last of the guards had retreated to the warmth of their barracks, their bravado lost somewhere between confusion and fear. Inside the cage, Elias sat cross-legged in mud and straw, his back against cold iron, a numbness crawling through his limbs. The only warmth came from Solano's massive body pressed close and the slow, rhythmic breaths of the tigers lying nearby. Every few minutes, the young tiger would lift his head, eyes sweeping the shadows for danger before lowering his chin back to his paws. The older tigress pressed close to Solano's flank, tail flicking gently, as if soothing them all. Occasionally, Solano would shiver, muscles twitching beneath his battered hide. But when Elias laid a trembling hand on the horse's neck, the animal calmed. In this strange truce, time slowed, the hours thick with memory and realization. Elias found himself drifting back through years, carried by exhaustion and the smell of animal musk. He saw himself at 6, curled beneath a kitchen table in a rundown apartment, cradling a stray kitten he'd hidden from his mother. He'd whispered to it, promising safety, sharing scraps of bread, heart swelling with hope each time the kitten purred in sleep. He remembered how his mother had found them, how her anger had softened at the sight of his tears, how for one season the apartment had rung with laughter and tiny chasing paws. As he sat now, grown, battered, so far from innocence, Elias wondered when he had lost the courage to protect those who needed him most. Was it when his father left? Or when the first factory job hardened his hands and hope into calluses? Or had it happened later, here on this mountain, with each compromise, each silent obedience to Gustavo's orders? Shame knotted in his gut, sharp and cold. He had been complicit, turning away from the suffering of beings like Solano for fear of losing the little he had. A shudder passed through him. He pressed his forehead against Solano's shoulder, the horse's steady breathing like the lull of ocean waves. He whispered, "I'm sorry." The words came out raw, scraped clean of all pretense. Solano's ear flicked, then he shifted his weight, leaning into Elias's side with a trust that humbled and broke him. Around them, the tigers stirred, the young male creeping closer, his giant head resting within arm's reach. Elias dared to lay a hand on the tiger's fur, feeling the heat, the pulse, the raw and wild possibility of forgiveness. The tiger rumbled deep in his chest, not a threat, but a sound ancient as the night itself. For the first time in years, Elias felt seen, not by people but by the creatures he had failed. He let his eyes close, surrendering to the memory of childhood nights when he'd imagined a world where kindness triumphed and every small act of courage mattered. Moonlight filtered through the bars, catching the scars along Solano's neck, the flecks of old blood on the tiger's paw, the calluses on Elias's own palms. He thought of all the moments he could have chosen differently, all the chances he'd let slip past. Guilt threatened to swallow him, but in the dark, something softer pushed back. A lesson Solano seemed to radiate with every breath. Survival was not just endurance, but the possibility of change. Elias raised his head, studying the horse's profile, the proud slope of his muzzle, the gentle tremor in his jaw. "You shouldn't have to carry this alone," he murmured. "You saved me, too." His voice faltered, choked by emotion, but there was resolve in it now. No matter what Gustavo planned, Elias knew he could not walk away again. He would protect Solano, these tigers, all the vulnerable creatures trapped in this nightmare, even if it cost him everything. The hours crept by. Elias dozed and woke in turns, each time scanning the shadows for movement. Once he caught Gustavo's silhouette on the far side of the compound, cigarette tip glowing like a hateful eye. Elias held his breath until the overseer disappeared, then released it slow, knowing the reckoning would come with daylight. Just before dawn, a hush fell deeper still. The old tigress shifted, stretching her spine. Solano stood, shaking the straw from his mane, then nuzzled Elias's shoulder. Elias rose, joints stiff, and wrapped his arms around the horse's thick neck. The gesture was awkward, desperate, a boy's hug in a man's body, but Solano accepted it, lowering his head in silent benediction. Elias pressed his lips to the Mustang's ear, voice a vow. "I promise you, never again, not on my watch." The words vibrated in the chilled air, felt by all who listened. He wiped his face with the back of his hand, drawing in a lungful of dawn's icy breath. The first light slipped through the bars, casting gold across scars and hope alike. Elias straightened, squaring his shoulders. The old shame was still there, but something else lived alongside it now. Something like courage. Growing with the sun, beyond the cage, the mountain began to wake. Birds called from distant pines, the guards shuffled in the yard, and Gustavo's voice echoed once more, sharp, impatient, hungry for retribution. But Elias didn't flinch. The night had changed him. He was no longer just a caretaker, no longer just a bystander. He was a protector. And come what may, he would stand his ground. Dawn broke in streaks of blue and gold, seeping through the bars and dappling Solano's coat with light. For the first time in years, the air tasted almost clean, a sharp, cool breath that cut through the stale weight of the compound. Elias blinked against the glare, exhaustion swimming in his eyes. Yet something inside him had settled. He pressed his palm to Solano's flank, feeling the steady rhythm of a life he had vowed to protect. Across the yard, the guards moved differently. Less sure, voices lowered, steps careful. Whispers followed Elias as he led Solano to a makeshift paddock for water. No one mocked him this morning. The tiger pen was silent, except for the watchful gold eyes that followed every movement, as if the animals themselves understood that a new order had dawned in the night. It was then that Mauro arrived. He came alone, stepping lightly over the broken ground, camera bag slung across his shoulder, face drawn and sharp with purpose. Mauro wasn't from the government or the police. He was an independent journalist, dogged and driven, with a history of uncovering what others wished hidden. He had heard rumors of Gustavo's menagerie, a place where animals disappeared, where cruelty was spectacle, and the world never saw what truly happened in the dark. Slipping through the perimeter, Mauro kept to the shadows, camera pressed to his chest. He crouched behind a pile of feed sacks, adjusting his lens, heartbeat hammering as he focused on the impossible scene unfolding in the yard. A battered Mustang, ringed by tigers, nuzzling the hand of a caretaker who looked half-broken and wholly resolute. Mauro captured everything: the raw tenderness between Elias and Solano, the wary truce among the tigers, the haunted faces of the guards, and the way the sun painted hope across the scars of the rescued horse. Every frame told a story, not just of suffering, but of resistance, of the wild spark that refuses to die. He moved carefully, following the path of Elias's work, watching as the caretaker cleaned Solano's wounds, talking to the horse in a low, steady voice, hands gentle, every gesture heavy with regret and promise. When Elias glanced up, startled by the click of Mauro's shutter, the two men locked eyes. Suspicion flared, then faded, replaced by a silent understanding. There was no time for words, only the work of saving what could be saved. Suddenly, a guard spotted Mauro. "Hey, who the hell are you?" A shout rang out, and within seconds Gustavo was storming across the yard, face purple with rage. "Get out! No cameras! You have no right!" he barked, grabbing for Mauro's arm. But Mauro was quick, slipping away, camera clutched to his chest like a lifeline. He ducked behind a truck, snapping a final shot as Solano pressed close to Elias and the tigers moved as one, circling the pair protectively. The commotion spread. Elias stood firm, shielding Solano as guards shoved past him, trying to corner the journalist. For the first time, Elias raised his voice in the daylight. "The world needs to see this. You can't hide forever." Gustavo spun, livid. "Shut up. You're finished here, Elias. You and that damned horse." But Mauro was gone, racing down the mountain path, images burned into his camera, hope burning in his chest. Within hours, he found a satellite signal in a nearby village, sending the footage out to the world. By midday, the internet was ablaze. Clips of Solano standing unharmed among tigers, of Elias cradling the battered horse, flooded social media. People watched and rewatched the surreal vision. A Mustang spared by predators, a caretaker risking everything to stop the cycle of cruelty. Comments surged: outrage, disbelief, and hope. #Solano trended in minutes. Animal rights groups demanded answers. News networks replayed the footage on loop, anchors' voices trembling as they described the night when the rules of nature and of men were rewritten. Inside the compound, Elias felt the shift long before the guards did. Phones rang non-stop in Gustavo's office. A helicopter thudded in the distance, press maybe, or officials. Donations poured into animal rescue groups. Across continents, people sent messages, some furious, others grateful, many confessing how Solano's story reminded them of their own battles, their own longing for hope. For Elias, the whirlwind outside became a quiet revelation inside. He realized, as the hours ticked by and the compound bristled with new tension, that this wasn't just about him or even about Solano. The horse, battered but unbroken, had become a living symbol, proof that survival was possible, that even in the darkest places, compassion could set fire to the world. Later that afternoon, as he brushed Solano in a patch of weak sunlight, Elias felt tears prick his eyes. Not the tears of shame or fear that had haunted him for years, but something different: relief, awe, a sense of finally being seen. He looked up at the mountains, then down at his hands, rough, shaking, but no longer empty. "We're not alone anymore," he whispered. The tigers pressed closer to the fence, the young male's eyes soft with recognition, as if he too understood what had changed. Elias knew that with the world watching, there could be no more hiding, no more silent bystanders, no more easy cruelty behind closed gates. Solano's story was out now, and with it, a reckoning for everyone who had turned away. By sunset, the compound felt less like a prison and more like the epicenter of something raw and new. As the guards argued and Gustavo fumed, Elias stood quietly beside Solano, letting hope build inside him, vow by vow. The battle had just begun, and this time he would not stand aside. By nightfall, the compound had become a pressure cooker. Gustavo stalked from office to yard and back again, barking orders into his phone, sweat beading on his brow. The guards, once smug, now moved with the nervous energy of men who sensed their world tilting out of control. Rumors of police raids and animal rights activists spread like wildfire. Through it all, Elias kept to Solano's side, always watchful, every nerve buzzing with the knowledge that change was coming. But so was danger. The tigers, once caged for men's amusement, had become silent sentinels, pacing the boundaries of their pen, never straying far from Solano. Even in darkness, the animals seemed to sense what was at stake. Any shift in the wind, a slamming door, a raised voice, would make the young tiger's ears prick, his body tense and ready. Elias tried to focus, to think ahead, but Gustavo was already plotting revenge. That evening, Gustavo called a meeting with his most loyal men. "We're getting rid of all of them," he spat. "Tonight, before anyone can take them from us. The market in the city will pay double now. Load the truck, round up the animals, kill the ones you can't move. No loose ends." He slammed his fist on the table, voice trembling with rage and fear. In another corner of the compound, Elias met with Mauro, who had snuck back under cover of darkness. Mauro's phone buzzed non-stop with alerts, news crews, animal rescue groups, and even threats. "We don't have much time," Mauro whispered. "If Gustavo gets desperate, he'll do something reckless. We have to get Solano and the tigers out, tonight." They needed help. That's when Clara entered the story, a distant, steady voice on Mauro's encrypted phone. Clara ran a mountain sanctuary 2 valleys over, a woman with a reputation for doing the impossible. Her words were calm but urgent. "I can send a truck, a few volunteers. But if you're caught, there's nothing I can do. Gustavo's men are dangerous. Move fast, move quiet, and be ready for the worst." Elias gripped the phone, his voice cracking. "I'm not a leader, Clara. I've only ever tried to survive." "Survival is how every rescue begins," she replied. "But courage is what brings it home." The plan formed quickly. Mauro would create a distraction, using his press credentials to lure guards away from the pens. Clara's team would park their battered livestock truck in a gully below the east fence. Elias would slip out with Solano under cover of darkness, leading the horse and the tigers through a hole in the wire fence. One Elias had been digging in secret for months, too ashamed to believe he'd ever use it. There were too many variables. One wrong step, one shout, one unlucky bullet, and the animals would vanish into black market trucks, or worse. The risk wasn't just loss, but catastrophe. Elias found himself staring at Solano as night deepened, anxiety eating holes in his resolve. The horse grazed quietly in the moonlight, scarred but dignified, eyes shining with the memory of the impossible peace he had found among predators. The tigers huddled close, their movements smooth, eyes flashing in the dark. Mauro tapped Elias on the shoulder. "You're the only one they trust. If you lead, they'll follow." The truth of it landed heavy. Elias was not a hero. He still felt every scar of his failures. But he understood now that leadership wasn't about perfection. It was about showing up, about standing in the storm and refusing to move. He walked the line of the fence, double-checking the escape route. The wire had been pulled back just enough for a horse to slip through, with space for the tigers to follow single file. Clara's volunteers, headlamps off, crouched by the waiting truck, nerves raw and ready. Elias knelt beside Solano, brushing a hand down the horse's neck. "It's time, old friend," he whispered. Solano nudged him gently, the warmth of his breath steadying Elias's shaking hands. In the pen, the tigers gathered at the gate, the young male pressing close, eyes burning with a wild trust. Mauro signaled from the other end of the yard. He started shouting, waving his press badge, his flashlight flickering in the dark. "Gustavo, police are coming. Cameras are outside. Let's talk." Guards spilled out of the office, running toward the commotion, batons and gun glinting in the torchlight. Elias didn't hesitate. He swung open the pen, whispering desperate encouragements to Solano and the tigers. The animals slipped out, hooves and paws silent on the grass. Heart pounding, Elias led the way, ducking through the hole in the fence, feeling barbs scrape his arms and the chill of freedom on his face. Clara's volunteers waved them forward, eyes wide as the strange procession emerged, horse and tigers moving as a single cautious pack. In the distance, shouts erupted. Someone had spotted the escape. Elias grabbed Solano's lead rope, running for the truck. The tigers bounded ahead, leaping into the open trailer, Solano following, head low, muscles tense but trusting. Volunteers slammed the doors, muffling the sounds of pursuit. Someone handed Elias a flashlight. He turned, breathless, and locked eyes with Mauro, who nodded once before vanishing back into the darkness. The truck roared to life, tires spinning in mud, engines snarling as Clara's team floored it toward the mountain road. In the chaos behind them, Gustavo screamed orders, guards firing shots in the air. But it was too late. The animals and their unlikely protector were gone. Inside the truck, as adrenaline faded, Elias slumped against Solano's shoulder. The tigers pressed close. He wasn't just a caretaker anymore. Tonight, he had become a leader, however frightened, however flawed. And as the headlights cut through the forest and the truck sped toward sanctuary, hope finally felt real, alive and trembling in the dark, but real all the same. The battered truck bucked and lurched over rocks as it clawed its way up the moonlit mountain road. Inside, the air was thick, sawdust, animal sweat, diesel, and the raw, biting scent of fear. Elias crouched beside Solano in the back of the trailer, one hand gripping the lead rope, the other pressed to the Mustang's neck, feeling the horse's pulse thunder beneath his skin. The three tigers crouched at the far end, bodies hunched and tense, eyes shining like coals in the gloom, every muscle coiled, listening for the sounds of pursuit. Outside, gunshots cracked through the night. One bullet ricocheted off the tailgate. Another shattered the rear window, spraying glass over Solano's hind legs. The horse startled, nearly losing his footing. Elias flung his arms around the animal's neck, murmuring soft reassurances, desperate to keep Solano calm in the chaos. His own heart raced so hard he thought it might leap from his chest. Behind them, Gustavo's jeeps tore after the truck, headlights slashing through darkness, engines roaring. Shouts echoed from the compound. Gustavo's men cursing, barking orders, calling for blood. A wave of panic swept through Elias. Every second stretched, each breath a battle to keep moving, to not look back. The driver, a wiry woman from Clara's sanctuary named Lou, swerved to avoid a fallen branch, tires skidding dangerously close to the edge of the ravine. In the cab, Mauro hunkered down, phone clutched to his chest, frantically texting updates to Clara and animal rescue contacts. Lou gritted her teeth, knuckles white on the wheel. "Hold tight," she yelled. "We've got a good lead, but we're not clear yet." Inside the trailer, Solano's breath came in great heaves, nostrils flaring with each jolt. The tigers crouched low, hackles raised, as bullets thudded against the metal sides of the truck. For a moment, time dissolved. Just the sound of gunfire, the truck's engine, the desperate pounding of hearts. A sharp curve loomed ahead, the road narrowing, lined with crumbling stone. Lou downshifted, headlights slicing through the swirling dust. Behind them, one of Gustavo's jeeps clipped a boulder, spinning off the road in a spray of gravel and curses. 2 jeeps remained, gaining ground. Elias fought to keep panic from boiling over. "It's okay," he whispered to Solano, barely believing it himself. "Just a little further. Just a little further." The Mustang shuddered, but steadied, his faith in Elias somehow stronger than the storm of violence behind them. Another round of shots rang out. One bullet whistled so close that Elias ducked, heart hammering in his throat. The tigers roared, not in fear but in wild, echoing defiance. The youngest male lunged forward, teeth flashing, as if to challenge the world through the truck's thin walls. Suddenly, Lou jerked the wheel, plunging the truck down a narrow service road flanked by dense trees. Branches whipped at the windows. For a tense minute, headlights vanished behind them, swallowed by the forest. The engine howled as Lou floored the gas. Mauro glanced back, wide-eyed, mouth set in a grim line. "We lost them, for now." But no one relaxed. Elias pressed his forehead to Solano's neck, fighting back tears of terror, of hope, of disbelief that they'd made it this far. In the hush that followed, the only sound was the shuddering breath of the animals and the low rumble of the truck's engine as it thundered toward freedom. The minutes dragged. Lou took every twist and turn with wild precision, the trailer rattling over ruts and stones. Twice they slowed to navigate narrow bridges. Each time everyone held their breath, waiting for the sound of engines behind them. But the road stayed empty. In the back, Solano shifted, letting out a long, trembling sigh. The tigers, exhausted by the night's ordeal, finally settled down, their flanks pressed together, tails twitching as if reassuring each other. At last, lights appeared on the horizon, soft, golden, and warm. Clara's sanctuary. Fences gleamed, not with barbed wire, but with soft security lamps. Trees clustered close, sheltering the valley. The final hill loomed, steep and muddy. Lou pushed the engine for all it was worth. The truck slid and shuddered, but made the climb. When they rolled to a stop inside the gates, Clara herself was waiting, bundled in a raincoat, flashlight raised. Lou jumped out, wrenching open the trailer doors. Elias blinked in the sudden flood of light. "We made it!" Mauro gasped, barely able to speak. Clara ran to the ramp, voice low and steady. "Easy, slow and steady. Let's get them out. No sudden moves." Volunteers gathered, hushed and awed, watching as Elias coaxed Solano out into the dew-soaked grass. The Mustang paused, head high, ears flicking. The tigers padded out one by one, blinking in wonder at the open air and the scent of freedom. The night was still not over. Helicopters circled in the distance, rescue or maybe law enforcement, no one could tell. But in this small clearing, for the first time in years, the animals tasted hope. Elias stumbled from the truck, legs numb, heart overflowing. He wrapped his arms around Solano's neck, feeling the Mustang's steady heartbeat, the solid warmth of survival. The tigers flanked them, forming a protective circle. The sanctuary volunteers stared, stunned by the sight. A man, a horse, 3 tigers, all survivors, all trembling but free. In that moment, every bullet, every bruise, every sacrifice was worth it. They had outrun death. They had outrun fear. And as dawn crept over the hills, Elias knew. They had outrun the past, too. As dawn stretched golden fingers over the hills, Clara's sanctuary emerged from the mist, a broad valley ringed by pines and wildflowers, cradled by mountains. The air was sharp with the scent of wet earth and promise. For the first time in years, Solano stepped onto grass instead of filth, his hooves sinking softly into dew and moss. He froze, nostrils flaring, eyes wide in wonder. The world was open, and for a heartbeat, time itself seemed to pause. Clara moved quietly, a gentle force of calm in the commotion. She signaled to her team, slow, no sudden movements. Volunteers lined the fence, silent and reverent as Elias guided Solano down the ramp, his own hands trembling not from fear, but from a swelling awe. Mauro hovered close, camera forgotten at his side, unable to look away from the battered Mustang's first hesitant steps toward freedom. Behind Solano, the young tiger leapt from the trailer, landing in the wet grass with a muffled thud. He shook himself, water and exhaustion flicking from his fur, and immediately turned to scan for Solano. The tigress followed, padding lightly on sore paws, whiskers twitching as she took in the scent of morning and wild green. The third, older tiger limped after them, keeping close, wary but unafraid. A hush settled as the animals gathered at the edge of the pasture, tigers and horse, side by side, with Elias in their midst. For a moment, not even the birds dared to sing. Solano's breath steamed in the chill air. He glanced back at Elias as if seeking permission, and Elias, voice breaking, whispered, "Go on, you're safe." Solano stepped forward. He lowered his head to sniff a clump of daisies, teeth parting in a way that might have been the ghost of a smile. The young tiger padded beside him, a silent sentinel, refusing to leave the horse's side. It was a vision no one present would ever forget. Scars and stripes, survivors of the same violence, bound by something deeper than instinct. Clara joined Elias, her boots squelching in the grass. "He's beautiful," she said softly. "And those tigers, they've never seen open land, have they?" Elias shook his head, tears threatening. "Neither has he, not since they took him from the wild." All around them, the sanctuary seemed to breathe, trees stretching, the creek chuckling over stones, horses in a distant paddock wickering their curiosity. Elias let himself stand still, absorbing every sound, every unfamiliar note of safety. For so long, every muscle in his body had been braced for cruelty, for orders barked and pain delivered. Now all that tension unwound, leaving him hollowed and light. Volunteers approached, carrying water buckets and piles of sweet hay. They kept their voices low, their eyes shining. Someone snapped photos, not for the internet, but to remember, proof that rescue was real. Mauro finally remembered his camera, raising it with hands that shook. He focused not on the wounds, but on Solano's cautious steps, on the gentle way the young tiger brushed against his side, as if anchoring himself to this new world. Elias watched Solano graze, the horse's mouth tugging at grass in slow, careful bites. The tiger sat down, eyes alert, keeping watch. It was then, in that quiet, that Elias felt the full weight of what had happened. Not just escape, not just survival, dignity restored. Here, on this wild patch of earth, no one would be forced to fight or perform. No one would be caged again. He sank to his knees, hands curling in the wet grass, shoulders shaking. For so long, he had carried shame and regret like stones in his pockets. He had been afraid to speak, afraid to act, afraid to hope. But Solano, scarred, stubborn, undefeated, had shown him that courage wasn't the absence of fear. It was the choice to act in spite of it. The tiger's trust, fragile but real, felt like a gift too precious to name. They could have lashed out. They could have turned on Solano, on Elias, on everyone. Instead, they had chosen to protect. Their silent alliance had saved them all. Clara placed a hand on Elias's shoulder. "You did it," she said. "You brought them home." Elias looked up, tears tracing muddy paths down his cheeks. He didn't argue or deny it. For once, he allowed himself to feel the pride and the sorrow and the relief all at once. "I couldn't have done it alone," he whispered. "None of us could." Solano, noticing Elias's distress, ambled over and nudged him gently, the horse's breath warm on his face. Elias pressed his forehead to Solano's neck, letting the world blur around him. The tiger settled down at their side, a living wall of protection. Above them, the sun crested the ridge, gilding scars and manes, tiger stripes and tired eyes. Freedom was no longer a dream. It was here under their feet and in the space between their breaths. Elias rose, leaning on Solano's strength. He met Clara's gaze and nodded. "Whatever comes next, I'm staying. I owe them that." And as he walked with Solano and the tigers deeper into the sanctuary, every step felt like a quiet act of defiance, a promise kept, and a new beginning. By the time the sun was high above the sanctuary valley, news of Solano and the tiger rescue had swept the world. Mauro's footage, edited with a trembling hand and posted online within hours, spread like wildfire. At first, it was animal lovers, advocates, and local news stations picking up the story. But by midday, major networks ran the headline across their banners: "Mustang and Tigers escape cruelty, find sanctuary in daring rescue." The video was mesmerizing. It began with Solano, battered but defiant, surrounded by tigers who did not attack but circled as guardians. The images shifted, Elias's weathered hands stroking the Mustang's neck, the frantic night escape under gunfire, the moment when the animals finally stepped into the light and safety of Clara's Valley. Mauro's lens captured every detail: sweat on Elias's brow, tears in volunteers' eyes, the young tiger's unwavering loyalty. By noon, the story had gone viral, millions of views, thousands of comments in every language. Social media lit up with outrage and hope. #Solano trended across continents. Activists launched petitions demanding Gustavo's arrest and a global ban on private menageries. Celebrities tweeted their support, and animal rights groups flooded the sanctuary with offers of help. Donations poured in, small bills from pensioners, hundreds from students, even a check for $50,000 from a famous singer who wrote, "For Solano and every animal who needs a second chance." But it wasn't just activists and animal lovers who responded. Letters and emails arrived from people who had never cared much about horses or tigers or animal welfare, people facing their own battles, their own cages. They wrote of finding hope in Solano's eyes, of recognizing their own struggles in Elias's trembling courage. "If that horse can survive, so can I," one woman wrote from a hospital bed. "Thank you for reminding me that it's never too late to fight for something good." Inside the sanctuary, the world's attention was both a blessing and a burden. Reporters set up cameras outside the gates. Clara and her staff juggled calls from lawyers, officials, and supporters. Elias kept to the pastures as much as possible, helping care for Solano and the tigers, shielding them from the noise of sudden fame. He watched Solano graze in the morning light, the Mustang's scars healing under sun and kind hands. The young tiger rarely left Solano's side, padding along the fence with him, a living reminder of that impossible night. Sometimes Elias would sit in the grass, the horse's head in his lap, the tiger purring nearby, and listened to the wind and the distant hum of helicopters. He felt the weight of all that had changed, the fear, the hope, the responsibility. Clara approached him one afternoon, clipboard in hand, eyes tired but bright. "You know, this place has never been so full of life," she said, "or so full of attention." Elias smiled, lines deepening around his eyes. "It's not easy. Solano's a symbol now. People see him, and they see themselves." Clara nodded. "The world's watching. But more than that, they're believing again." Not everything was easy. Gustavo was arrested on the edge of the city, trying to flee with a suitcase of cash and forged papers. The authorities found his compound empty and broken, the cages smashed, evidence scattered. His trial made headlines. His network of cruelty unraveled in the courts. Lawmakers debated new legislation to crack down on illegal menageries and strengthen animal protection. Nothing would undo the pain, but change at last was coming. For Elias, the deeper miracle was quieter. Every day, volunteers handed him letters from strangers, a firefighter in Montana, a single mother in New Jersey, a retired miner in West Virginia. Each told their own story of loss, of wounds and survival, and how watching Solano walk through the pasture with a tiger at his side gave them the courage to try again. He read every letter, some aloud to Solano, the horse's ear flicking as if he understood every word. One evening, as pink clouds drifted over the sanctuary, Mauro set his camera aside and joined Elias on the grass. "Did you ever think any of this was possible?" Mauro asked, voice soft. Elias shook his head. "I used to think all I could do was survive. Now I see that one act, one choice can ripple out. I never expected to change the world, but Solano did. Maybe the tigers did too." Mauro grinned, wiping at his eyes. "You changed too. Maybe that's the biggest miracle." As night fell, the sanctuary glowed with lanterns and laughter. Volunteers shared food, stories, and quiet hopes for the future. Elias looked at Solano and the tiger, side by side in the moonlight, and felt a profound peace, a sense that the fight was not just for survival, but for dignity, for possibility, for healing. He knew the world's attention would fade, that new stories would rise and fall, but some things would last. The scarred Mustang running free, the tiger who chose to protect, the boy who became a protector. Letters would keep arriving, laws would change, and every time Solano lifted his head to the sun, a little more of the old darkness would fall away. In the hush of evening, Elias made a quiet vow. He would stay, building a life of meaning and mercy with Clara's team. No longer a bystander, no longer afraid. This, he knew now, was what it meant to be free. Evenings at the sanctuary unfolded slowly, as if the land itself was learning to breathe again. The valley, once just another hiding place, had become a cradle of second chances, a patch of earth where hope could take root and scars became stories worth telling. Elias would often wander the pastures at dusk, hands shoved in his pockets, listening to the soft music of crickets and the low whicker of Solano grazing. The young tiger, always close, kept quiet watch, stretching in the grass, sometimes pressing his nose gently to Solano's flank, as if reminding both of them that they had survived. Some nights, Elias found himself standing by the fence, lantern in hand, looking back over all that had happened. He saw it with a clarity that cut to the bone. The boy who loved animals but learned to turn away. The man who spent years swallowing his voice. The horse who refused to break. The tigers who chose mercy instead of violence. He remembered the old shame, the weight of every time he'd failed to act, and the terrifying freedom that came with finally choosing to do what was right, even when he was shaking, even when it meant losing everything he thought he had. The world had moved quickly after the rescue. Some days, the gates of the sanctuary seemed to blur with the coming and going of reporters, officials, students, and strangers. People who had watched Solano's story online and driven hours just to see a Mustang and a tiger grazing together. Proof that the impossible could become real. Elias welcomed them when he could, guiding tours in his quiet way, never seeking the spotlight. He answered questions, posed for photos, shared what he had learned, that animals, like people, needed patience, space, and the chance to heal. But his favorite moments remained the quiet ones, when the valley was just his, Solano's, and the tiger's. He'd talk to the animals in a low voice, telling stories, reading the letters people sent from every corner of the country. There were words of thanks, of hope, of pain. Some were short, a line or two from a young girl in Nebraska. Solano makes me brave. Others were longer, a retired soldier writing, "Watching that Mustang find freedom made me try one more time to leave my own cage." Elias kept every letter in a shoebox in his cabin, a reminder that sometimes the smallest ripple could reach far beyond what anyone expected. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the ridge and painted everything gold, Elias found himself sitting on the pasture fence, Solano grazing just beyond his boots, the young tiger curled nearby. He let the silence fill him up, then spoke, softly at first but with growing steadiness, as if the words were meant not just for himself, but for everyone who had ever listened or hoped. "I was silent for a long time. I thought maybe I was too small to change anything, or that my voice wouldn't matter. Maybe you've felt that way too. But a horse with eyes full of defiance taught me to stand up, even when I was afraid, even when it meant standing alone." He watched as Solano flicked an ear, as if to say, "Yes, keep going." The tiger yawned and rolled in the grass, at peace at last. "You don't have to be perfect," Elias continued, his gaze tracing the fence line, the wildflowers, the mountains he'd once called a prison. "You don't even have to be strong every day. Sometimes, courage is just a choice you make in one small moment, a choice to speak up, to reach out, to protect someone who can't protect themselves. That's enough to start a change. That's enough to change your life." He stood and walked into the pasture, letting the animals gather around him, their shadows stretching long in the amber light. He felt the eyes of the world on him, strangers, friends, everyone who had followed this wild, unlikely journey. He felt their questions, their quiet hope. What now? What do we do with the world's pain, with our own? He answered the only way he knew. Not with a speech, but with an invitation, a gentle, honest call that came from the deepest part of him. Maybe you've seen a moment of courage in your own life too. Maybe you've been the one to stand up, or maybe you're still waiting for your chance. If Solano and these tigers taught me anything, it's that we learn from each other's stories. So share yours. Write it, tell it, pass it along. You never know whose life you might touch, or what hope you might spark. He paused, reaching out to rest his palm on Solano's warm, steady neck, the horse's breath stirring the hair at his wrist. "True freedom isn't just about breaking our own chains," he said. "It's about reaching back and breaking someone else's too, whether they're human or animal." As dusk settled, Elias stayed in the field, surrounded by the beings who had changed his life, changed each other, changed the world in small, stubborn ways. The sanctuary glowed with lantern light and laughter, with quiet conversation and the soft steps of hope moving forward, one day, one story at a time. And if you're listening, if you find yourself wondering whether you matter, whether your story could possibly make a difference, remember Solano. Remember the tigers. Remember Elias, once silent and afraid. Remember the power of one voice, one act of kindness, one choice to protect. Share your story. Let's learn from each other. That's how the world changes.